what are you doing? I said, look, I'm just getting out of Dodge. And she didn't know why, but I read a book called The Grunch of Giants by Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller in 1983, a very small book, and I reread it in 2007, and it's just like this, nothing's changed. The same thing's going on.
You know, Dr. Fuller was the creator of the Buckyball as well as the geodesic dome like Epcot Center in Florida.
And also the U.S. Pavilion at the Expo 67 World. Now, I was a student of his, so every time I listened to him, I was going, holy mackerel. And so when I met my wife in 84, she really could. I said, look, I'm just getting out of Dodge. I can't do what I'm doing anymore. And that's when I started teaching because I could see this crisis coming. The worst is coming within the next 5 years. I'm afraid we're going to collapse from one thing or the other, but we will collapse. There's no way of preventing it right now.
Yeah, the U.S. dollar agrees with you. We're seeing considerable breakdown there. It had every chance to rally for 3 years in a row, and there's considerable technical weakness in the U.S. dollar, the greenback now struggling against the euro in particular, and that, I think, is an ominous sign that may indicate really serious political, geopolitical, and economic strife here in the U.S.
Well, if you read that book, it's a late book out called Currency Wars by Jim Rickards.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a fabulous book to read because it's not just the U.S. dollar. It's called The Race to the Bottom, where every country wants to devalue their dollar just so they can kind of bankrupt their neighbors, but they also bankrupt citizenship, their own citizens. So Rickards' book, Currency Wars, very good reading. I interviewed him yesterday, and he was not optimistic per se.
No, I can
imagine.
But
I think the biggest thing I could warn people is this: from my indications, the people in the stock market, the guys have 401ks and IRAs full of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. They're the next target. They're going to get wiped out. Because the last target was 2007. It was the homeowners. Now they're going to get the retirement plans.
No, I think you're right. I think, with rehypothecation, the wake-up call, the warning signal, the shot across the bow was clearly the MF Global fiasco, as well as Cyprus there in Europe. I think those two events, then, of course, the government of Poland took the entire populace and lifted them upside down and emptied half of their pension pocketbooks without any promise, for future repayment. So, I think the writing's on the wall, but folks are too busy just trying to get through the business day to pay much attention to what's going on.
Yeah, they're watching the Jerry Springer show.
They're too busy watching American Idol or what have you. But, but there are some folks waking up, and that's why, we're trying to get the message out there. So as we wind down this interesting discussion, I wonder if you could give people your outlook on the precious metals. I forgot to mention it. My guess is you're still accumulating after about 30 years.
Right. What I got rid of were my precious metal ETFs because I don't trust paper anymore. And I stuck with all my hard assets. I think the good thing, I'll just give the good news for people. If you're prepared, you'll actually do better. For example, when I saw this crisis coming, about 1997, I started buying gold and silver like a wild man. And back then, gold was, I think, $295 an ounce or something. And so when people say, well, how do you feel about it coming down? I said, I'm still up $1,000. Give me a break. And then my machine guns keep going up because you can't build another machine gun.
I'd like to know what asset you're holding that's up 3-4-fold. There's not too many stocks, unless you were just one of those lucky Google shareholders. Apple, one of these companies, most people long since sold their shares. They were shaken out. In the final analysis, it really protects your purchasing power, precious metals.
Well, I think you should get some definitely. I think there's 11 years worth of silver left. So when you get that kind of stat, I think there's about 14 of gold out of the ground. So when you look at that, and then the cost of mining gold today is around $1,100 an ounce, depending on where you're mining it. So even at 13, you're giving a $2 premium on it.
Well, I just read an article that claims that there's only 1 billion ounces of silver above ground, whereas 30 to 40 years ago there used to be 20 to 30 billion ounces of silver, whereas now there's 6 or 7 billion ounces of gold, which means there's actually several-fold more gold in reserves above ground. But the catch is that there's a considerable amount of silver mined each year, but now they're claiming that 1 billion ounces in production annually is being consumed at the pace that it's coming out of the ground.
Well, it's always been consumed, and that's why there's only, 12 years left, I think.
No, you're exactly right. Reclaiming the silver and gold in cell phones, as well as system boards on computers and virtually any other electronic product. You can take a cell phone apart, and that little keypad that has the gold on it, I mean, that is a considerable amount of 18 to 24 karat gold you can send in for a few dollars or take down to your local scrap yard.
Well, I think that's the point. It's not doom and gloom. It's actually doom and boom. If you're prepared for it, you're going to do very well. Now, you should have a gun in the meantime, but other than that, I'm a former Marine. I did 2 tours in Vietnam, and it doesn't do much good.
Well, you need to have...
But anyway, the whole point here is this, is that you can do very well if you prepare for it, but I would be very concerned about being in the stock market.
Although I wouldn't be surprised if they don't continue this monetary stimulus for the next few months, at least until the end of Dr. Bernanke's tenure there at the Federal Reserve. So we might even surprise folks on the long side. I wouldn't go too heavily into bearish funds at this point, bearish ETFs. I'd watch the market carefully before that. But I do agree with you, the end game here is not going to be pretty.
No, I think, and I don't think we don't have many years left. So that's why I speak to you guys, and I've been preparing this since '83. I think if people read Dr. Fuller's book called The Grunch of Giants, R. Buckminster Fuller, and if you can read it, he's pretty hard to read. It's a very small book, but you'll say nothing has changed. Instead of Obama, there's Reagan, and instead of Bernanke, there's Volcker. That's the only difference.
The same dogmas and ideologies.
He mentions Glass-Steagall. He mentions Eisenhower warning of us of the military-industrial complex and all this. And basically what it is the heist of the U.S. government. And that's what's happened. The Fed is not federal. It's a cartel of international bankers.
I listened to an interesting character yesterday who referred to the Federal Reserve. He said it's no more federal than Federal Express.
Yeah, that's a good saying. I would say that's true. And I always ask the question, who pays Bernanke who signs Bernanke's paycheck? Nobody really knows. And that's why I go, who's paying it? Who's Bernanke hopefully knows something.
1913, the Fed's tenure year, about 100 years, and they've essentially ruined the U.S. dollar. And some people believe that they've transferred most of the wealth offshores. And apparently 10 foreign banks own the Federal Reserve, and they're not known for the most part. We don't know who owns our Federal Reserve, and that's against the Constitution of the United States.
That's correct. Kind of the good news is, let's talk about records, of currency wars. He says the gold is stored in New York. That's why when the Germans wanted their gold back, they said, wait 7 years.
Well, Robert Kiyosaki, we want to thank you for your thoughts today and continued success.
Thank you for having me on your program. I appreciate it.